Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we are back for another episode of Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on Libertarian Censored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first, we have new bill aims to block both online adult content and VPNs from share.google post by FlimsyOut5563, and that looks like an article from CNET, your guide to a better future. New bill aims to block both adult content and VPNs, how your VPN could be affected. And yeah, personally, I don't think this bill has any chance of passing. With that being said, Reddit really only cares because porn's practically a religion on Reddit. It's one of I'd say the big three elements of the Reddit religion are at this point porn, censoring dissent, and what's porn and atheism in that, and roughly in that order. And yeah, personally, I don't like any government control of the internet, but this is just Reddit finding another thing to fearmonger about. It's just, you get tired of all this Reddit trying to fearmonger about every single thing, and yeah, eventually you just start toning it out. Next we have "Bury the words are violence" cliche posted by Lemon Limelight, and they said from the Free Press. And when the news broke of Charlie Kirk's assassination, the reaction of thousands of young Americans online was one of delight. In the minds of these gleeful posters, Kirk deserved to die because of his words that allegedly promoted policies resulting in hate, violence, and even death. They think that this was because they have forgotten or have been trained to unlearn a crucial direct distinction. Words are not bullets. For years, I've warned that equating words with violence erases the bright lines liberal societies drew after centuries of bloodshed. The law draws line of precision. Advocacy and advocacy remains protected unless it is intended and likely produce imminent lawless action. That's the Brandenburg Standard, and it exists because the alternative is to let the powerful decide which ideas are allowed. Campus culture has been eroding that line for years. Students are told that offensive ideas are quote-unquote harm, that science is quote-unquote science is violence, and a flourish that you should now embarrass users, that speech can be quote-unquote literally violence. Teach students that objectionable speech is violence and that you invite them to see their own aggression as self-defense. This is the bloody fallacy we just witnessed. Accept the premise that rhetoric is a physical attack and you hand extremists moral permission slip to answer speech with force. We need to bury this troop, retire it from classrooms, HR trainings, and editorials for good. The response on the political right has been no less dangerous. The urge to answer murder, censorship, or official punishment of vile speech, instituting powerful officials that propose sanctions for people who raise, rationalize, or make light of the killing online. The U.S. Deputy Secretary of State publicly worded that foreign nationals who glorify the murder could face visa consequences. Consular officers were told to take action, and the public was encouraged to report posts. In Florida, the education commissioner warned that vile, sanctionable teacher speech after the killing could trigger discipline, including certification consequences. These are not the thought experiments. They are real signals from people with real power, and they cut directly against the lesson we must relearn. Ugly speech is answered with more speech, not legal process. Investigate true threats and incitement under settled law, otherwise keep the public square open. So what do we do now? First, bury the words of violence cliche. Anyone trying to argue that speech is violence should be treated with sneers, jeers, condemnation. Free speech is not merely a favor for our friends. It's the best nonviolent technology humans have for solving our conflicts. To honor a man who died while speaking, don't gag his enemies or canonize his ideas. Rebuild a culture that says no idea is so sacred it can't be challenged, and by no person is so despised that they can be murdered in cold blood for speaking. Highest tolerance for speech, zero tolerance for violence. Keep the line bright. Civilization depends on it. And yeah, I guess I would agree with all that. And yeah, just because you might not like what someone says doesn't mean you have a right to kill them over it, but of course on Reddit, that's very much how Reddit operates. That words are violence, and they seem to think Charlie Kirk's killing was entirely justified, and that just goes to show you just can't take this website seriously. They're going on about free speech now because Jimmy Kimmel was canceled. And I personally don't really care for Jimmy Kimmel, but I don't think the government should have played any role in cancellation, which you could argue that they did. The FCC might have pressured ABC a little. Of course, that's the narrative ABC was going with. Because, ABC, I think they just wanted to get rid of Kimmel's licensing contract. We'll talk about that more later. But regardless, it's a lot of people have no principles when it comes to free speech, and that definitely includes Reddit. If in the outgroup speech is inherently dangerous, and, everyone in the outgroup is going to be labeled a Nazi, fascist, etc., etc., but when their guy gets censored, suddenly it's the worst thing ever, and that just goes to show you, they have no principles. Reddit's suddenly saying, we support free speech. Well, in reality, Reddit is one of the most anti-free speech platforms on the internet. Despite formerly being one of the most pro-free speech platforms around 2012, the admins and mods since then have been all ideologically captured and are for censorship as long as it's not their side. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Every recent move that's made in the new fight to overturn gay marriage from unclosetedmedia.com, posted by Neat Concussions, and they added, "This is a recent piece that I wrote for the news outlet Uncloseted Media. They're small growing, and I thought this is the perfect place to post about government overreach. Most of this sort of self-promotion is not appreciated. I'm happy to read the post and not make us think of it." And yeah, personally, this is another Redditor trying to find an issue where there is none. They're not going to overturn gay marriage. But of course Reddit, I bet this guy, he secretly wants them to overturn gay marriage. The Redditor wants to be a victim, and that's very much why I think they secretly love the Trump presidency. They love being a victim. They love constantly saying, "Oh, you're gonna murder all gays, blacks, etc., etc." And because they need their narrative that we're the victims, the other side, is the aggressors, and that's why shooting them when they're just saying words is completely justified. And that's why you can't take this website seriously. It's really just in-group good, out-group bad. All social media is that to some extent, but Reddit is particularly bad because of how echo chamber it is, and how if you say something that goes against the narrative, it's either getting downvoted or outright removed entirely. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And then we have, "Because they are hypocrites, Mr. Paul, and liars who never practice what they preached," posted by Donald Key, and looks like a Twitter screenshot from Ron Paul. "If Democrat cancel culture is wrong, how can Republican cancel culture be right?" And then it's a screenshot of the story, "Disney pulls to make him alive immediately following Kirk comments." And yeah, personally, I would agree with Paul there. Just because the Democrats did it doesn't mean the Republicans should be doing it as well. Personally, I don't care for either cancel culture at all, but ultimately people are going to justify what they justify. Democrats, they made their own grave here. They constantly said, "Oh, it's just freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom of consequences" for years, and suddenly it's used against them, and suddenly it's the worst thing ever. And that just goes to show you that the people don't have principles. They only have teams. I'm sure if the Democrats ever find something else to cancel Republicans over again, suddenly it's going to be completely fine again. But, it's only bad when the out-group uses it. When the in-group does it, it's completely justified. And that's why you can't take a lot of people seriously these days, because it only just matters who does something rather than what they do. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have another school shooting. Find out if the authoritarians will care, posted by Baton13. And that looks like another shit lib Tom the Dancing Bug comic that they usually post. I'm not going to read all that, but it's like I personally Reddit comics are the worst. They're all just orange man bad, orange conservatives bad, etc., etc. And yeah, if you want to make a good comic, you have to have a variety of jokes, and pretty much all the Reddit comics are either orange man bad or Republicans bad. And when you only have one punchline, a lot of Redditors say, "Oh, conservatives only have one joke." When in reality, a lot of progressives only have one joke too, and that's in-group good, out-group bad. And eventually, you just start kind of get numb to it, and the constant shit libbery of Reddit. Next, we have new ways to see community activity on Reddit, posted from RedditInc.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and they added, "In case anyone is interested in some changes Reddit is making." And yeah, personally, Reddit seems to always find a way to shitify itself even more every year, so I personally am not for probably going to be answers to these new changes. But with that being said, I'm pretty much, I can't, no matter how much they shitify it, I'm probably not going to leave until it's either goes under or is banned. Because, ultimately I'm in too deep at this point in the immortal words of Sum 41. I'm in too deep trying to keep all the blood in my head. But, Reddit, they're constantly shitifying it. And it seems to get, the Reddit shitlibs get more Reddit-y every year, like Ninja Lover here. But that doesn't mean, you can't stop fighting this woke circle jerk. And, it's such a woke circle it's been banning me for over 100, around episode 250, but I'm still doing this podcast because, they can't censor me as well. If they want, if it was up to them, they'd have me permanently censored like Charlie Kirk, and there's only one way to permanently censor people, and that's exactly what happened to Charlie Kirk. But regardless, I'm using my free speech as long as I still have it, and that's exposing all of the Reddit propaganda mills, lies, and falsehoods. Next we have Speak With Your Wallet, posted by Plasman30, and they said, if you're upset about Kimmel getting fired, then 1, cancel Disney Plus right now and let them know Kimmel is the reason you canceled. 2, if you were planning a trip to Disney Park, cancel it and tell them you're doing it because of Kimmel. 3, stop watching ABC. 4, let ABC advertisers know you will not buy their products if they continue to advertise on ABC. 5, don't go to see any Disney, Marvel, Star Wars movies in theaters anymore. 6, if you're a comic reader, stop reading Marvel titles. Here's a list of everything Disney owns, and it's linked to a list of assets owned by the Walt Disney Company on Wikipedia. And yeah, personally, I think this is just cancel culture in response to cancel culture, I would say, personally, if you want to boycott anything for whatever reason, I think you should be able to, but, this is just very much our society right now it either seems like the reaction to everything is either cancel or boycott anyone you disagree with, and eventually just get tired of it, if you don't want to interact with ABC or Disney or any of that corporate conglomerate, more power to you. I personally don't really care for them. I don't really care for any big corporation. They are very much private authoritarians who, the libertarian position, a lot of people say the libertarian position is state authoritarians needs to be held accountable, but private authoritarians is okay. Well, I would say the libertarian position is, you're forced to interact with government, you're not forced to interact with private corporations, but that doesn't mean private corporations can't be authoritarian. But regardless, if people want to boycott Disney, that's fine. But eventually, I think people are tired after pretty much over a decade at this point of cancel this, boycott that, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Trump admin has been quietly pushing to retake Afghan base from the Taliban for months. Sources say from CNN.com, posted by LegioX. And yeah, personally, I would be against that. Afghanistan is clearly unsalvageable at this point from a Western. They clearly don't care for Western values, so I'd say don't force your Western values on them. And I liked how we exited Afghanistan, but now Trump wants to go back. It just goes to show you how, the war machine always is going to justify whatever it's going to justify. Trump was taking credit for the Afghanistan withdrawal, but now he wants to go back. It just goes to show you, the war machine always has to keep going on, regardless of how justified it is or not. Next we have Trump floats pulling licenses if networks are against him after Jimmy Kimmel suspended from CNBC.com, from Plasman30, and this is how fascism works: control the media to control the message. And I would say, a lot of media is controlled by the woke progressives currently. But that being said, the libertarian position is we shouldn't have licenses or the FCC in the first place. As Daryl Perry famously said, the 2016 Libertarian Convention debate, what's next? License to toasting your own damn toaster? And that's very much how I feel, I personally don't care for ABC or Reddit, but, the libertarian position is, they should be allowed to say whatever they want to, even if it's a blatant falsehood, like Jimmy Kimmel said, he did the thing that got him canceled was, he said that the shooter was definitely a MAGA guy, and yeah, I personally think that's a blatant falsehood, but I don't think the libertarian solution is to cancel him over it. Same with all Reddit and its falsehoods. The libertarian solution is just ignore it. Jimmy Kimmel was probably averaging 1 to 2 viewers an episode at this point. His cancellation is the most media attention he's received in at least a decade at this point. And it just goes to show you how, cancel culture is often going to have a negative drawback. It's going to bring attention to something that no one really cared for. Let's be honest, no one really cared for Jimmy Kimmel. Reddit only cares for him now because he's been canceled. It just goes to show you, it's Reddit, it's also because he helps Trump's a fascist narrative. I would say if Trump's as fascist as Reddit makes him out to be, Reddit would have been banned a long time ago, probably during his first term. But regardless, it just goes to show you how, a lot of people these days are worth more when they're canceled than when they aren't, because it's the people will want a virtue signal about how the government's going after him, they'll go after us soon, and that's very much how Reddit works. Reddit's pretty much called Trump Hitler every single day since he first announced he was running back in June 2015. And eventually he starts showing out, and that's why he gets away with so many authoritarian actions like this, because when you constantly call someone Hitler, they're going to stop paying attention, and yeah, eventually you just get tired of the circle jerk. I do think Trump's an authoritarian, and I do think you could make the argument that the FCC did pressure ABC to censor Kimmel, but regardless, Jimmy Kimmel's not someone I think you should be dying on the hill for. He's a bland and unfunny Hollywood shitlib. And eventually you get tired of him, of all the circle jerk TV, and that's why I'm glad that TV is dying, because now increasingly people control the narrative rather than giant corporations like Disney through the ABC network, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, yes, Jimmy Kimmel's suspension was government censorship, posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the technology subreddit, and yeah, if you want to think it's government censorship, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine. But ultimately, I personally think it's more on the government censorship side, because the FCC did kind of threaten him. But with that being said, I did see a thing on Twitter recently about how Hakeem Jeffries did threaten to censor Fox News for spreading election misinformation in an official letter back in 2023. But as per usual on Reddit, they only care when the other side does it. They don't care when their side does it. And I'm sure that, if the next Democratic president took Fox News off the air or any other program that they thought was offensive, Reddit would be completely justifying it. But since it's happening to one of their own, it's suddenly the worst thing ever. And that just goes to show you, as they say pretty much all these posts, no values, only teams. Next we have TikTok to be sold to Trump's right-wing billionaire buddies and converted into a propaganda mill from techdirt.com, posted by CH4Locks. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for TikTok as it is. I think it already is a propaganda mill. I think, I think Reddit's one of the worst propaganda mills on the internet, and Reddit would never dare call themselves out for it. So personally, I don't really care. If Trump wants to buy, if he's a billionaire, what he's want to buy TikTok, that's fine. I personally wish they would buy Reddit instead, because maybe then it would start to be more balanced, and some of the trash, like the people who post on this subreddit, who are just pretty much shit lib trash, who just constantly post the same orange man bad headlines over and over again, maybe they would leave and go to another platform, and maybe then Reddit would be more balanced, kind of like after when Elon bought X. So, I think maybe that's what Elon should do. He should buy Reddit, and maybe he could rename it Y for all I know. I don't really care. At this point, I just want this Reddit circle jerk to end, but it's a circle jerk that never ends. That's very much what it is. Then we have, are modern libertarians still favorable towards George's ideas like David Nolan was, posted by Maddie Ghost, and that's the meme they posted, the Royal Libertarian, and it's a virgin walking, and it's the Addison flag, which is I don't bite, and it's kind of poorly drawn, and it says, we'll call taxation fast one permitting even worse robbery for rent seeking, and then the real G Libertarian, it's the Chad, and it's a Henry George's book, Progress Through Poverty, and it says, no, true liberty only comes when people keep the value they produce when being compensated for what they can't produce more of. And then they added, what kind of taxation is the least harmful? My own preference is for a single tax on land. If landowners doing their own valuation, you'd start at the price of what you'd be willing to sell your land and pay taxes on that amount. Anyone, including the tax collector who wanted to buy it at that price, could do so. This is simple, fair, and minimizes government snooping into our licensed businesses. And then let's link to an article on that for marketliberal.org. And yeah, personally, I do think, if there did have to be one single tax, I think it should be the land value tax that Henry George proposed. But regardless, I do think all taxation is going to be inherently fast, because people shouldn't be forced to do things they don't want to do, and that includes any forms of taxation, including land value tax. So I personally do have some sympathy with the Georgist movement, but I personally do think all forms of taxation are theft, even if they might be an extremely justified form of taxation like land value tax. Next we have, Trump poised to fire a U.S. attorney for resisting effort to charge U.S. and New York Attorney General Letitia James, sources from abcnews.go.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for Trump firing anyone, but ultimately, if he wants to fire anyone he wants to, that's on them. Libertarians usually like when the government workers get fired as possible. Of course, this shit lib subreddit, it's not a libertarian subreddit, it's pretty much the biggest shit lib subreddit on this site at this point, even worse than r/politics, I would say. It only wants to just say orange man bad repeatedly, and eventually get tired of all the interchangeable orange man bad headlines. Next we have analysis, 12 new GOP seats out of thin air. Republicans are halfway there, from CNNPolitics.com. Or from CNN.com, but it's from CNN Politics, but posted by Seabiscuit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for gerrymandering, but the Dems do horrible gerrymandering as well, and Reddit doesn't care, but when the Republicans do it and they go crazy, it just goes to show you, Reddit has no values over this point other than in-group good, out-group bad. Next we have Hexif refuses to answer yes or no, posted by FlimsyOut563, and that's also from the Facepalm subreddit. And yeah, it looks like that post has since been removed, so I can't see what it was, but yeah, if Hexif wants to say whatever he wants to say, that's on him. I personally don't care for the speech of any government employee, and that's important to be remember. If he wants to say yes, if he wants to say no, I don't care. I don't even know what it's talking about at this point, because Reddit, it got removed by the moderator of the other subreddit, but this subreddit keeps it up because they just need as many orange man bad and Fred's headline as possible. Next, we have Trump's media enforcer is relishing in his Jimmy Kimmel moment from the WashingtonPost.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and they added, naming Brendan Carter chair of the Federal Communications Commission in November, President-elect Donald Trump heralded him as the warrior for free speech. And yeah, that's just going to show you, free speech, whenever it comes to Reddit, it's only free speech for the in-group. Same with looks like MAGA and friends over there. When it comes to free speech, people only want free speech for their group. It's telling, because this guy, this poster, the guy who posted this article, the subreddit, has had me censored from his quote-unquote uncensored subreddit for over a year at this point, and he doesn't see any irony in that whatsoever. He would say, oh, it's not the government censoring you, but just as I said earlier, just because a private corporation is censoring you doesn't mean that it's justified. And of course, Reddit mods aren't even paid by Reddit. Either they do it for free. That's why a lot of people like to call them Jannies instead. And yeah, just because authoritarianism might be private instead of public doesn't mean it's not authoritarianism. And this user is a great example of that. They care that Jimmy Kimmel is censored because Jimmy Kimmel. Because the narrative is the government censored him, even though I would argue that the actual thing is ABC just used that as an excuse to get out of his MySync contract. But regardless, Reddit, they only care that the out-group censored, the in-group censored. They don't care that the out-group censored. You can tell because this guy's had me censored from the subreddit for over a year, and he sees no irony in that whatsoever. And that just goes to show you how unself-aware a lot of these Redditor types are. Next, we have Trump comments on Ilhan Omar from Absinthe or Two, and that's crossed from the conservative subreddit, and that looks like a true from Donald Trump. Ilhan Omar's country of Somalia is being plagued by a lack of central government control, persistent poverty, hunger, resurgent terrorism, piracy, decades of civil war, corruption, and pervasive violence. 70% of the population lives in extreme poverty and widespread food insecurity. Somalia is currently ranked among the world's most corrupt countries, including bribery, embezzlement, and dysfunctional government. All of this, and Ilhan Omar tells us how to run America. Well, P.S. wasn't she the one that married her brother in order to gain citizenship? What scum we have in our country, telling us what to do and how to do it. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Make America great again. And yeah, personally, I wouldn't call Ilhan Omar scum, but if he wants to call her scum, that's fine. A lot of Democratic politicians call anyone who dissents at all fascists, Nazis, etc., etc., but Reddit only cares when Donald Trump calls the out-group something bad. When the in-group calls the out-group something bad, suddenly it's completely justified. And it's like Ninja Lover says, you're calling single member of Congress scum is horrifying. It's calling everyone who voted for it, and that she represents scum. Dangerous and dark times are upon us. Well, in reality, the Democrats constantly labeled everyone who dissents at all Nazi, fascist, Hitler, etc., and they don't care. It's just this Reddit logic of, oh, the outgroups. The in-group needs to be held, the out-group needs to be held fully accountable, but the in-group can justify whatever it wants to. They never share, this user never shares anything bad about the in-group, and that just goes to show you they're very much very unprincipled, just like everyone else uses this subreddit. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And I think we're going to wrap up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.